In a world where billion-dollar deals are made with the stroke of a pen, one man chose to walk away from it all. Elijah Parker, a black CEO who had built his logistics empire from nothing, stood on the edge of a $900 million deal that would change the future of his company and his life. But just moments before signing, he made a decision that stunned the corporate world. He walked away, not because of the money, not because of the deal, but because of something much deeper, something that could never be bought or negotiated: respect. It wasn't the first time Elijah had fought for what was right. It wasn't even the first time he had stood up to the powerful elite. But this time, it wasn't just about business, it was personal. When his father, Henry Parker, a proud, humble man, was publicly humiliated by the Whitmore family, the billionaires who were supposed to be his business partners, Elijah knew it was a moment of truth. This is the story of what happened next, a story of pride, family, and integrity, of a man who stood for what was right, even when the world told him to bow down. The world would remember this moment, not for the deal that fell through, but for the values that it represented. This is the story of how one man refused to let money or power silence his voice, and how in doing so, he reshaped the meaning of legacy in the business world. Elijah Parker had built his empire from nothing. A single warehouse in the Bronx had been the birthplace of what was now one of the most successful logistics companies in the country. What began as a modest operation had grown into a multi-million-dollar business, with nationwide supply chains and partnerships stretching from coast to coast. But today was different. Today was the day Elijah had worked toward for years. The day he would seal a $900 million deal with the Whitmore Group, a conglomerate that had been in business for generations. This merger would be the key to securing his company's future. And yet, despite all the deals Elijah had closed, none felt as big as this one. This deal wasn't just about numbers. It was about the future, his family's future, and the legacy of hard work that his father had always taught him to value above all else. Elijah leaned against the polished surface of his desk, staring out at the skyline of downtown Manhattan from his office. The city stretched beneath him, a testament to the success he'd achieved. His father, Henry, had always reminded him that success wasn't just about making it to the top. It was about knowing where you came from and honoring those roots. Elijah had never forgotten those lessons. He glanced at the clock. His father was scheduled to arrive soon. Henry had been with him every step of the way, supporting him when they had nothing. And now, as Elijah prepared to finalize the biggest deal of his life, he wanted Henry by his side. Elijah had insisted his father attend. It was important. This was as much his victory as it was Elijah's. Henry, however, had never been one for flashy celebrations or high society gatherings. The Whitmore estate, with its grandeur and exclusivity, was not a place where Henry felt at home. But Elijah had asked him to come anyway. They had made it this far together, and today would be no different. As the black Lincoln Navigator rolled up the long driveway to the Whitmore estate, Henry Parker adjusted his collar, his movements deliberate and steady. His suit was crisp, tailored in a way that commanded respect. But it wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. Henry had never been one for grand gestures. He believed in quiet strength, in letting his actions speak louder than anything he could wear. The Whitmore estate loomed ahead, a sprawling mansion that seemed to be carved out of history itself, standing tall with its marble columns and sweeping lawns. To the outside world, it was a symbol of wealth, power, and old money. But to Henry, it was just another building, another place where people with money came to make deals that often didn't account for the ones who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make it all happen. Henry had been in the business world long enough to know that success didn't always translate into respect. Still, he wasn't going to let that taint his moment. His son was about to make a major move, and Henry was proud to be there, proud to witness the legacy Elijah was building. When the car stopped, the valet hurried to open the door, but before Henry could step out, a woman in a navy blue uniform appeared, blocking his path. Her expression was impassive and her stance unyielding. "Excuse me," she said, her tone colder than the marble steps beneath their feet. "Deliveries and staff use the back entrance." Henry blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. I'm here for lunch with my son, Elijah Parker, he said, his voice steady, though a flicker of confusion passed through him. The woman didn't flinch. Yes, well, if you're with staff or catering, it's policy. The rear entrance is to the left. Henry took a moment to process her words. It wasn't the first time someone had assumed he didn't belong, but it always stung. He'd spent his life working hard, earning his place, and yet here he was, treated like a servant instead of a guest. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I'm not with staff, Henry said, his voice firmer this time. I'm a guest here. My son is one of the business partners, Elijah Parker. The woman didn't seem to hear him. She just stood there, staring at him as if he wasn't even worth acknowledging. For a moment, Henry's patience began to thin. But before he could respond, his son's voice broke through the tension. From across the lawn, Elijah stood up. Their eyes met, and Elijah's expression shifted. His smile faded, his jaw tightening as he noticed the exchange between his father and the staff member. Henry knew that look. Elijah wasn't one to tolerate disrespect, especially not when it came to his family. As Elijah started walking toward him, Henry stood up straighter, trying to shake off the sting of humiliation. He could feel the eyes of the Whitmore family on him, but he refused to let it show. This wasn't about him, it was about Elijah, about the deal that had been years in the making. But as Elijah reached him, the tension in his face was palpable. You okay, Dad? Elijah asked, his voice low but full of concern. Henry nodded, forcing a smile. I'm fine, son. Don't make a fuss. But Elijah wasn't going to let it slide. He looked at the staff member and then turned back to his father. I'm not going to let anyone disrespect you, Elijah said firmly. Not here, not anywhere. Henry placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Don't ruin your moment, Elijah. But Elijah wasn't about to let this go. He turned to the staff member, his tone sharp. This is my father, he said, his voice carrying an authority that couldn't be ignored. You just disrespected the most important person in this room. The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out. She flushed red, embarrassed, as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Elijah didn't raise his voice, but the power in his words was unmistakable. Without another word, Elijah walked Henry back to the black Lincoln Navigator, opened the door for him, and helped him inside. As he closed the door, he reached for his father's arm. Don't worry about it, son, Henry said softly, though his eyes betrayed the hurt he felt. You are the moment, Elijah said with a firm resolve before shutting the door and turning back to the mansion. Inside the Whitmore estate, the atmosphere was tense. The deal that had taken months of negotiations was supposed to be a celebration, a moment where Elijah Parker's logistics empire merged with one of the most prestigious names in business. But now the entire mood of the room had shifted. It was clear that something had changed, and the Whitmore family could feel it. Victoria Whitmore, matriarch of the Whitmore family, sat at the head of the grand dining table. She was dressed in an elegant pearl necklace, her expression cool and composed. The dinner guests murmured amongst themselves, their eyes occasionally darting toward the door, wondering what had happened to Elijah. Elijah, however, was no longer in the mood for celebration. He had walked out of the room without signing the deal, a silent protest against the treatment his father had just endured. The moment he returned to the dining hall, he didn't sit at the table. Instead, he walked to the far end of the room, where he could see everyone clearly, but still be removed from the transaction about to take place. Is everything all right, Elijah? Asked Preston Ward, the Whitmore Group's general counsel, trying to break the silence. But Elijah didn't answer right away. He looked around the room slowly, his gaze landing on each member of the Whitmore family and their business partners. His eyes lingered on Victoria Whitmore, who was still lounging in her seat, sipping her wine, a slight smirk tugging at her lips as if she had already won. But Elijah wasn't focused on her relaxed posture. His gaze was intense, and his body stiffened with purpose. I need to say something, Elijah said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of something much deeper. A few people glanced up. Some shuffled in their seats nervously. The room was filled with a heavy, pregnant silence. He turned to face Victoria directly, his voice still quiet but resolute. You all know how much this deal means. It means everything for the future of my company. But it's not just about the money or the merger. It's about integrity. It's about family. The tension in the room grew thicker. Victoria's smile faded, replaced by a look of mild confusion. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Elijah stood his ground, his eyes unwavering. "When you humiliated my father earlier today, when you insulted him in front of all of your colleagues and your guests, I realized something. This deal isn't worth it. Not if it means trading my principles for a seat at your table." There was a brief pause before a low murmur filled the air. The Whitmore family members exchanged uncertain glances. Clinton Whitmore, Victoria's eldest son, cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to diffuse the situation. "Is this some sort of negotiation tactic?" he asked with a nervous laugh. "Come on, we've all been through worse than this." But Elijah's response was unwavering. He walked over to his seat, not to sign the papers, but to make one final statement. "This isn't a negotiation. This is about respect. And I won't sign any deal that begins with disrespecting my family." Victoria looked incredulous, her eyebrows arched in disbelief. "You're not seriously going to walk away over this, are you?" Elijah paused, looking directly at her, his tone now cold and unflinching. "I'm serious. You disrespected my father, and that's something I can't ignore. Not now, not ever." The room fell silent. Even the lawyers who had been watching the exchange nervously knew this wasn't just about business. It was about something much more profound. Elijah finally turned away from the table and walked out of the room, leaving the deal, the paperwork, and the future of his company behind. As Elijah walked out of the Grand Whitmore estate, the cold evening air hit him with a rush. But it wasn't the chill that sent a shiver down his spine. No, it was the weight of his decision, the gravity of what he had just done. In a single moment, he had turned down $900 million, walked away from what could have been the deal of a lifetime, and left an empire of old money behind. But his father was worth more than any deal. He took a deep breath as he approached the black Lincoln Navigator, his father still sitting inside, waiting. The car was a quiet sanctuary from the noise inside. Elijah opened the door, and there, in the dim light, Henry looked up at him. His face was calm, but his eyes held something else, something that made Elijah's chest tighten. "Dad," Elijah said softly as he slid into the seat next to him. "You okay?" Henry didn't speak for a moment. Instead, he let out a slow sigh and turned to his son. "I'm fine, son," he replied, but there was a vulnerability in his voice. "Don't let this mess with your head. I've been through a lot worse." Elijah's fist clenched involuntarily. "It's not about me," he said, his voice tight. "I won't let anyone treat you like that. Not in front of everyone. Not in front of me." Henry shook his head, his weathered hands brushing through his hair. "This world's always gonna have people who think they can walk all over you, son," he said, his tone soft but firm. "But you can't let them get to you. You just keep doing what you do." Elijah looked at his father, this man who had worked from dawn till dusk, who'd raised him with nothing but grit and humility, who had taught him that the real value of success wasn't the money or the title, but how you treated people along the way. His father's face had aged, his shoulders had bowed with the weight of life's hardships, but his spirit was unbroken. Elijah wasn't sure what hurt more, the insult his father had just endured, or the crushing realization that money had always been more important to the Whitmore family than the values that had shaped him and his father's entire existence. "I should have said something to her," Elijah muttered, his mind racing back to that moment. Victoria Whitmore's cold, cutting words. "I should have stood up for you right then, but I couldn't let it ruin what we've worked for." Henry placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "Son, you did more than that. You did what I've always taught you. You stood for what's right. Don't ever forget that. You'll never have to answer to anyone for how you walk through life, just as long as you stand tall." Elijah looked at his father, his anger and frustration melting away for a moment. He knew what his father had meant. It wasn't about the deal anymore. It wasn't about the billions or the merger. It was about integrity. And integrity wasn't something you could trade for a seat at a table. He straightened his back. I'm done with this. Henry's brow furrowed. Done with what? Done with them. Done with that world. Elijah took a deep breath, his eyes hardening with new resolve. I'm walking away from this deal for good, and if they don't like it, then let them deal with the consequences. Henry's face softened with pride. I raised you well, son. I'm proud of you. You're a man of your word. That's all anyone could ask for. In that quiet moment inside the Lincoln Navigator, with the cold night air surrounding them, Elijah realized something. Walking away wasn't failure. It was freedom. He had the courage to stand up for what was truly important, not just for him, but for the future. The deal was done, but the world was just beginning to see who Elijah Parker truly was. The next morning, Elijah stood in his office, staring at the blank whiteboard that had been filled with plans for the $900 million merger the night before. Now it was just a cold reminder of a deal that never happened. The numbers on the board seemed so distant, so irrelevant in the wake of what he'd just done. He had made the right decision, but it didn't stop the weight of it from pressing down on him. The deal with the Whitmore Group was supposed to elevate his company. It was supposed to bring prestige, growth, and all the things that came with power and money. But Elijah had walked away from it all, not for a bigger deal, not for a better offer. He had walked away because of his father, because of the disrespect his father had faced at the hands of the Whitmore family. Was it worth it? Elijah asked himself quietly, his fingers tracing the surface of his desk. He could feel the weight of the decision, the ripple it would cause in the industry, and the uncertainty it created within his own team. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Nia Green, his head of marketing. Her message was short but to the point. We need to talk. Some of the investors are calling. Elijah took a deep breath and dialed her number. The line clicked, and Nia's voice came through, steady and professional as always. Elijah, what you did yesterday, it's already hit the media, Nia said, her voice tinged with both concern and admiration. We've been getting calls from reporters, from other CEOs, and from some investors. They want to know what's next. Elijah leaned back in his chair, staring out the window as if the skyline might offer him some clarity. I know I don't regret walking away, but I'm not sure how to move forward. Do you want to talk to the press? Nia asked. I can set up a press conference, or we could issue a statement, but we need a plan. Elijah paused, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. I'll talk to them, but not in the way they expect. Nia hesitated before responding. What do you mean? I'm not going to apologize for what I did. I'm not going to make excuses. What I did was the right thing, and I'm not going to let them twist it into something it's not. The words hung in the air. Elijah knew what was coming. He could feel the media storm gathering. His decision had made him a symbol, but symbols had a weight that was heavier than any contract or business deal. I'll handle the press conference, Elijah said finally. But let's make it clear. We're not backing down. If they want answers, I'll give them the truth. I'll give them who I am and what I stand for. The line was quiet for a moment before Nia spoke again. Understood. I'll start preparing the team. Let me know when you're ready. Elijah ended the call and sat in silence for a moment, taking in what he had just committed to. He wasn't just defending his family anymore. He was defending his entire identity, his company, his values, everything he had worked for was now on the line, and the world was watching. As he stood up from his desk, a sense of purpose washed over him. He wasn't going to let this moment define him. He was going to define it. He walked toward the door and paused, looking at the photos on the wall, snapshots of the journey from warehouse to empire, from nothing to something. And at the center of it all was the face of the man who had helped him get there, Henry Parker. It was time to face the music. It was time to speak for himself and for his father, for the values that had shaped him, for the legacy they were building together. As Elijah stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the conference room, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about business. It was about something much bigger than that, and he wasn't going to let anyone, not even the Whitmore family, take that away from him. The press conference room was packed. Journalists from across the country sat hunched over their notebooks, their cameras poised and ready. They had come to witness the fallout from the dramatic $900 million deal cancellation, and they were eager to see how Elijah Parker, the black CEO who had just walked away from the merger with the Whitmore Group, would handle the storm. Elijah stood at the podium, his back straight, his gaze unwavering. The weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders as the room fell into an expectant silence. Nia stood off to the side, her eyes scanning the room, monitoring the situation. She had been with Elijah since the early days of his company, and she knew how to handle the chaos that was about to unfold. The first reporter spoke up, their voice sharp with curiosity. "Mr. Parker, you've walked away from a $900 million deal, something most CEOs would consider the opportunity of a lifetime. Why did you make that decision?" Elijah looked directly at the reporter, his expression calm but firm. "Because sometimes the deal isn't worth the cost," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I walked away because the respect of my family, especially my father, matters more to me than any business deal. No amount of money can buy that." There was a pause. The reporters scribbled down notes, the weight of his words sinking in. Elijah could feel the shift in the room. What they had expected from him wasn't what they were hearing. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't justifying. He was standing his ground. Another reporter raised their hand. "But many would argue that walking away from such a large deal is reckless. The Whitmore Group is a powerful name in the business world. Couldn't this decision hurt your company in the long run?" Elijah's eyes narrowed slightly. He had been prepared for this question. He had anticipated the skepticism, the doubts. But he wasn't going to let them derail his message. "If doing the right thing means taking risks, then I'm willing to take them," he said, his voice growing stronger. "This isn't about survival in a system that thrives on disrespect. This is about creating something different. We don't build our companies on the backs of others. We don't grow by stepping on people. And if the cost of doing business means compromising our values, then I'd rather walk away." A hush fell over the room. For a moment, it was as if time itself had stopped. Elijah Parker wasn't just defending a business decision. He was speaking to something much larger: the need for change, the need for integrity, and the value of standing firm in the face of adversity. A journalist from the back of the room spoke up next, her voice tentative but cutting. "And what about the Whitmore family? Your public walkout. Don't you think that's going to damage their reputation?" Elijah took a deep breath, his posture unshaken. "The Whitmore family's reputation is built on power and privilege. What happened yesterday wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of the way they treat people who aren't like them. My father has worked harder than most of the people in that room, and yet he was treated like he didn't belong. That's not something I can ignore." The reporters exchanged glances, whispers filling the air. They had expected Elijah to be flustered, to backpedal and apologize for his bold stance. Instead, he had doubled down, making it clear that this wasn't just a business decision, it was a statement. One final reporter stood up, her tone cautious but insistent. "So what's next for you, Mr. Parker? How do you plan to move forward after walking away from such a significant deal?" Elijah paused for a moment, a small, confident smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We build something better. We create a new kind of business. One that isn't just about profit, but about respect. Respect for the people who make the business work, respect for family, and respect for the values that matter." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the journalists, his voice ringing with certainty. "The future is about more than just numbers. It's about how we treat each other. And I'm committed to making that the foundation of everything I do." As Elijah finished speaking, the room remained silent for a moment before the reporters erupted into a flurry of questions, trying to capture the essence of his bold declaration. But Elijah wasn't swayed. He had said what he needed to say, and now the world could hear it loud and clear. As he stepped away from the podium and walked toward the exit, Nia joined him, a proud smile on her face. The media storm would continue. The questions would keep coming. But Elijah knew one thing for sure. He had taken the first step towards something far more valuable than any business deal, and the world had taken notice. Back at the Whitmore estate, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Victoria Whitmore sat at the head of her polished dining table, surrounded by her children, Clinton and Bradley, and a small army of lawyers and advisors. They had all watched the press conference, each with their own mix of disbelief and frustration. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently on the table as she scanned the media coverage on her phone. The headline blared at her, "Elijah Parker cancels $900 million deal over family disrespect." Her eyes narrowed, but her lips remained tightly pursed. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Elijah Parker. Clinton shifted in his seat, his discomfort palpable. "This is bad, Mom," he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't care how much he claims to stand for family values. We can't let him get away with this. He's turning this into something it's not." Victoria glared at him, her expression icy. "You don't get it, Clinton," she snapped. "This is bigger than just some petty squabble. He's made a spectacle of it, and now he's turned himself into a martyr. Do you think the media will just let it go? They'll twist it, and they'll make him a hero. Meanwhile, we're the villains in the story." Bradley, her younger son, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. "Maybe we should just apologize, Mom. I know it's humiliating, but if we issue a public apology, maybe this all blows over. We can save the deal, the merger, and the family reputation." Victoria shot him a cold look. "An apology?" she scoffed. "Do you think that will undo what he's done? He's made it clear that he doesn't care about the deal. He doesn't care about us. And you want me to apologize?" Her voice grew louder as the words escaped her. "Elijah Parker doesn't understand how business works. This world doesn't operate on respect. It operates on power. And if we let him think that he can just walk away from us without consequences, then we've lost everything." A silence filled the room as her children exchanged uncertain glances. They had seen their mother wield power with ease before, but this was different. They were up against someone who didn't play by their rules. Suddenly, Eleanor Wynne, the Whitmore family's crisis PR manager, broke the silence. "Victoria, we can't afford to lose face on this," she said, her voice sharp with professionalism. "But I agree that an apology might not be enough. The narrative has already shifted. Elijah's made this about respect, about family, and if we don't respond properly, it'll only make things worse." Victoria's eyes flicked to Eleanor, her expression softening for a brief moment. "What do you suggest?" Eleanor stood, her heels clicking on the marble floor as she walked toward the window, staring out at the sprawling estate. "We need to take control of the narrative. We can't let Elijah continue to paint us as the villains. What if we turn this around and say that we were trying to extend an olive branch? That it was a misunderstanding? We'll push the narrative of family values too, and make it clear that this wasn't just about money, but about something bigger." Clinton frowned. "And you think that'll work?" Eleanor met his gaze. "If we do it right, but we can't afford to show weakness. We have to fight back." Victoria considered this for a moment, her fingers tapping the table in thought. The Whitmore family had always controlled the narrative, had always had the power, but now they were on the defensive. Elijah had put them in a position where they couldn't rely on their usual tactics. "Fine," Victoria said, her voice cold and determined. "We'll respond with strength. We'll frame it as a lesson in leadership. We'll show the world that we're not afraid to hold people accountable for their actions. This will pass, but only if we stand firm. Let's make sure the world knows that we're the ones with the power, not him." Eleanor nodded, taking out her phone. "I'll get started on the statement and organize an interview for you. We need to control the message." Victoria gave a sharp nod. "Good. Let's make sure Elijah knows exactly who he's messing with." Meanwhile, Elijah sat in his office, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded in just 24 hours. The media storm was far from over. The Whitmore family would not back down easily, and Elijah knew they'd be coming for him next. But this was no longer about money, business, or even the deal. This was about something much bigger. This was about power, respect, and legacy. As Elijah prepared for what was to come, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. He had done the right thing. He had walked away from everything that society told him he should want: money, status, power, for one simple reason: family. And now he was ready for whatever the Whitmore family or the world threw at him next. The next few days were a whirlwind of calls, media appearances, and internal meetings. Elijah's decision to walk away from the $900 million deal had sent shockwaves through the business world. The media was buzzing, the Whitmore family was scrambling, and Elijah had become the center of a storm. But despite the chaos, Elijah had never been more certain of his decision. He knew that the battle wasn't just about business, it was about establishing the kind of company and the kind of man he wanted to be. Integrity, family, respect. They weren't just buzzwords to him. They were the foundation of everything he had built, and he wasn't about to let anyone undermine that. It was early in the morning when Nia Green, his head of marketing, came into his office with a new round of reports. The media was relentless, with every outlet asking the same questions. Why did Elijah Parker walk away from the Whitmore deal? What's next for his company? Nia placed a thick folder on his desk. We've got pressure from all sides. The Whitmore family is pushing their narrative hard, saying you're reckless. They're framing this as a failure. A black CEO with no respect for business values. It's an ugly game they're playing. Elijah leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering as he listened. I expected as much, but I'm not backing down. Nia hesitated. You're not. But what about the investors? Some of them are losing patience. They're questioning your leadership. Elijah ran his hand over his face, then stood up and walked to the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden light over the city. It was a beautiful view, but today it didn't comfort him. The city seemed to be reflecting his own inner turmoil, the tension, the uncertainty. He turned back to Nia, his voice steady but firm. I didn't get here by doing what was easy. I built this company on trust, hard work, and principles. And that's what we're going to hold on to, no matter what the Whitmore family says, no matter how many investors question us. Nia nodded slowly, understanding his resolve. So what's the plan? Elijah paced for a moment, his mind already moving ahead. We need to show the world who we really are. We'll hold a press conference, not just to talk about the deal, but to redefine what success really means. We'll show them that integrity is the true measure of leadership. Rebrand the company's mission? Nia asked, a hint of skepticism in her voice. She wasn't sure if the press would buy into the idea of a self-made CEO turning down millions for the sake of integrity. Elijah's smile was small but resolute. Not just the company's mission, my own. This is more than a business move. This is personal. And I'm not just fighting for the future of the company. I'm fighting for something bigger. We're going to show people what happens when someone stands by their values, even when the stakes are high. Nia stood quietly, taking in his words. She had been with Elijah for years, and in all that time, she had never seen him more certain. She knew this was more than just a response to the Whitmore family. This was about rewriting the rules of the game, about setting a precedent for others to follow. And she was ready to stand by him, no matter what came next. That afternoon, Elijah called a company-wide meeting. His senior executives, his management team, and his closest advisors filled the conference room. As he walked in, he could feel the weight of their expectations. They had seen the headlines. They had heard the doubts. The eyes of the business world were on him, but Elijah wasn't going to let their uncertainty shape his next steps. Elijah, we need to talk about the fallout from the Whitmore situation, Chris Nolan, his CFO, said as soon as the room fell quiet. Some investors are threatening to pull their funding. If this continues, we could lose more than just the deal. We could lose everything. Elijah stood at the front of the room, his voice calm but filled with purpose. I understand the concern, Chris, but let me make this clear. I didn't get into this business for quick wins or easy money. I'm not in this for temporary gains. I'm in it for the long haul. And the long haul is built on trust, on doing what's right, not what's convenient. He paused, letting his words sink in. I know this decision might seem risky, but it's a risk I'm willing to take because I believe that we can build something different, a company that stands for something more than just profit. We're going to continue on this path, and we're going to come out stronger. There was a moment of silence. The room was heavy with doubt, but Elijah's resolve was unshakable. Slowly, the room began to shift. His leadership wasn't about to crumble under pressure. Instead, it was becoming clearer than ever that this was the defining moment of his career. "Let's turn this around," Elijah said, his voice a low but steady command. "We're going to use this moment to redefine who we are. I want a new press release going out tomorrow. I want our story front and center, not just about the deal we walked away from, but about what we stand for." One of the senior advisors spoke up, her voice cautious but hopeful. "Are you sure about this, Elijah? There's a chance we could lose everything." "I'm sure," Elijah replied, his eyes unwavering. "This is the only way forward. We don't get to define success by the standards of those who never had to fight for it. We define it on our terms." As the meeting came to a close, Elijah felt the weight of his decision settle once more. But this time, it felt right. He wasn't just leading a company, he was leading a movement. And nothing, not even the Whitmore family, could stop it. The following days were filled with intense media coverage and public scrutiny. But amidst all the noise, Elijah Parker remained unwavering. The Whitmore family's response had been swift. They issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, spinning the narrative to make Elijah appear reckless and impulsive. But Elijah wasn't afraid of their tactics. He knew the power of standing by his convictions. His inbox was flooded with messages, some supportive, others critical, but most of all, questions. What now? What was his next move? Elijah sat in his office, alone for the first time in days. The weight of the decision was still heavy, but it was no longer a burden. It was a calling. He was ready for what was to come. He wasn't just walking away from the Whitmore deal. He was starting something new, something that would leave a legacy. Nia Green entered the office holding a tablet in her hands. She was as focused as ever, but even she couldn't hide the concern in her eyes. "Elijah, the press conference has set things in motion. The support is growing, but so are the challenges. People are looking to you for direction now. The investors are watching closely. Some are holding off on their next steps, and there's still a lot of uncertainty about the future of the company." Elijah looked up from his desk, his eyes calm but filled with resolve. "I'm not worried about the investors. They'll see the vision soon enough. It's not about the money anymore. It's about doing something real, something that lasts." Nia raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And you think the world will follow you?" "Not the world, Nia," Elijah said with a small smile. "Just the people who matter, the ones who understand what I'm fighting for, the ones who want more than just profits." Nia stood silently for a moment, weighing his words. Finally she spoke, her tone softening. "What's the plan then?" Elijah stood up, walking toward the window, gazing out at the skyline of the city that had once seemed so far out of reach. But now it felt within his grasp. "We're going to turn this around. We're going to make the Parker Foundation the face of our company's new mission. We'll focus on creating opportunities for underrepresented communities, giving them a chance to build their own futures." Nia looked at him, a mix of admiration and awe in her expression. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "I'm not backing down," Elijah said, his voice unwavering. "This isn't just about business anymore. It's about changing the game." As Elijah laid out his plan, Nia's skepticism turned into excitement. The foundation was a bold move, one that would make a powerful statement. It wasn't going to be easy, but Elijah had never been one to shy away from hard work. The days that followed were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and planning. The press continued to cover the fallout from the Whitmore deal, but now they were beginning to take notice of Elijah's new direction. The Parker Foundation began to take shape, its mission clear: to empower marginalized communities, to invest in education, to create opportunities for those who had been overlooked for too long. Elijah knew it wasn't going to be easy. He'd have to fight for every dollar, every partnership. But that was the point. This wasn't going to be a cushy, easy ride. He was in it for the long haul, and he would show the world that success could be defined by more than just wealth. It could be defined by the impact you made. One afternoon, Elijah was meeting with potential partners for the foundation. The conversation was going well, but he could sense the hesitation in their eyes. They were waiting for him to make a move, to convince them that his foundation and his company were worth the risk. Elijah didn't mince words. He knew that if he wanted to secure this deal, he would have to go all in. "You're looking for returns. You're looking for growth," Elijah said, looking each potential partner in the eye. "But I'm not here to talk about profits. I'm here to talk about impact. I'm here to show you that by investing in people, in communities, you can change everything." He paused, letting his words sink in. The future isn't just about wealth. It's about legacy. And if you want to be part of something bigger than just another merger or acquisition, then this is where you need to be. For a moment, there was silence. Then one of the potential partners nodded. "You've got our attention, Elijah." Elijah's heart raced. He had just made his first significant step toward turning his vision into a reality. This was more than just business. This was a movement, and he wasn't going to stop until he had changed the game. It had been weeks since Elijah had walked away from the Whitmore deal. The media had moved on to other stories, and the storm surrounding his decision was starting to die down. But for Elijah, the journey was just beginning. The foundation was growing, the investors were beginning to come around, and the company was gaining a new kind of reputation, one that was rooted in integrity, respect, and family values. Elijah stood in the middle of a community event hosted by the Parker Foundation. The venue was simple, but the atmosphere was electric. People from all walks of life were gathered here. Students, teachers, workers, families, people who had been given a chance to build their own futures because of the work Elijah and his foundation had set in motion. The walls were lined with banners that read, "Empowering communities, creating opportunities, building legacies." He walked around, shaking hands, speaking to people, hearing their stories. It was in these moments that Elijah found the true meaning of success. It wasn't in the billion-dollar deals. It wasn't in the corporate boardrooms. It was in the smiles, the hope, and the gratitude from those whose lives were changing because of the foundation. As Elijah made his way to the stage for his speech, he could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't about him. It was about something much bigger. His father, Henry, stood in the back of the room, his face filled with pride. Henry had always believed in Elijah, always pushed him to be the best version of himself. And now Elijah had made it clear that it wasn't just about business. It was about creating real, lasting change. Elijah took the microphone, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. The room fell into silence, the energy palpable. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady and strong. "I know a lot has happened over the past few weeks. You've all seen the media. You've all the stories. But what I want you to know is this. What happened wasn't just about walking away from a deal. It was about standing for something. It was about saying that there are things more important than money. Things like respect, like integrity, like family." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We're here today because we believe in something greater than just profits. We believe in the power of people. We believe that anyone, no matter where they come from, no matter what they've been through, has the right to succeed. And it's our job to help make that happen." Elijah's voice caught for a brief moment, but he pushed through. "I didn't get here by myself. My father, Henry, is the reason I'm standing here today. He taught me everything I know about hard work, about resilience, and about treating people with respect. So this is for him. This is for all of you. And this is for everyone who has ever been told they didn't belong." The crowd erupted into applause, but Elijah wasn't looking for validation. He wasn't doing this for the applause. He was doing it because it was the right thing, and the world was starting to see that. As the evening continued, Elijah stood in the corner, talking quietly with Nia. The success of the event was undeniable, but Elijah knew this was just the beginning. The Parker Foundation was now on the map, and his company was growing in ways he had never imagined. Investors were beginning to reach out, seeing the value in what he was building, something that wasn't just about returns, but about lasting impact. Nia looked at Elijah, a smile playing on her lips. "You did it, Elijah. You really did it." He looked around the room, his eyes softening as he watched families enjoying the evening, children laughing, and people coming together in a way that made him believe in the change he had set in motion. "We did it," he replied, his voice full of gratitude. "This isn't just my success. This is ours, and we're just getting started." As the night drew to a close, Elijah walked over to where his father stood. Henry had been quiet, but Elijah knew his father was proud. He could see it in the way his eyes sparkled, the way he stood tall despite the years of struggle. Elijah placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "I couldn't have done this without you." Henry turned to him, his voice thick with emotion. "You've always had it in you, son. You just needed to believe it." Elijah smiled, the weight of everything that had happened settling into a sense of peace. He had made his mark. And it wasn't about the money, the deals, or the prestige. It was about something much more meaningful. It was about respect. It was about family. And it was about creating a legacy that would stand the test of time. The Parker Foundation was just the beginning. Elijah's journey had only just begun, and the future was full of endless possibilities. With that, Elijah Parker stepped into his new world. A world where success was measured not by the size of a paycheck, but by the depth of the impact you made. He had built something real, something lasting, and this time, he didn't need a multi-million-dollar deal to prove his worth. His legacy was already written, and it was more powerful than anything money could buy. Thanks for watching. Where are you watching from? Kindly comment below and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.